Welcome back. You are listening to Nate the Hate on iTunes, YouTube, Spotify, and Google Podcast. Today's episode is dedicated to the Zelda Sensei, who generously donated a $100 gift to the channel. Thank you for your generosity and support, Zelda Sensei. We will answer and read your question at the end of the episode. And joining me today, as always, is my co-host, MVG.
Hey, what's going on, Nate? Great to be here.
Always great to have you. And today we are going to have a counter discussion to the topic we had earlier in the week, where we talked about Microsoft's failure to launch and how the Xbox Series X and Series S, while very compelling and interesting hardware, doesn't have great software to launch with that hardware, and how the hardware is basically launching with no true next-gen showcase. And to counter that, we're going to talk about the PlayStation 5, which is now available in North America and will be available in European regions next week. And in many ways, the Sony PlayStation 5 is a complete contrast to what we are seeing from Microsoft in the Series X. Whereas the Series X is very powerful, very well put together hardware, but it lacks the software. The PlayStation 5 has the software, but it seems to be encountering a number of hardware issues. And that's something that a lot of people have been talking about over the last week leading up to the launch. And problematic hardware is nothing new in this industry. Every piece of hardware launches and has some sort of problem. The Switch was scratching the screens whenever you docked it. Yeah. The 3DS had a wobbly screen or some dead pixels. And the Xbox 360 is well known for the red ring of death, where the system's continually overheated.
The Series X sets on fire and blows smoke out of its exhaust on the top there.
Remember all those reports from earlier in the year where they said their Xbox Series X were overheating? Who knew it would actually shoot smoke out of the top? That was a pretty funny internet prank, and it just proved how quick certain websites out there wanted to jump on anything they could cause a controversy out of. And they were made foolish when it was just, I vaped and blew my smoke pretty much into my Xbox. So when I turned it on, it shot the smoke out.
It's funny, it was the first thing I noticed when I saw that clip. I was like, come on, This is ridiculous. No system exhausts that much smoke these days. There's fail safes in place and things like that. The days of the magic smoke when your system just blows up, that's long gone.
But maybe we can thank Microsoft, because now if someone tries to sell you their Series X on Craigslist or eBay and it says, not from a smoker's home, you'll know they're a liar when you turn it on and it starts to shoot out a big puff of smoke. And then you can call them and saying, I smell the tobacco and my system is exhausting a lot of your secondhand smoke. So I'd like a refund. But the PlayStation 5, unfortunately, it does seem to have hardware issues, and some of them will likely be fixed in the very near future, possibly with a firmware update. And some of the missing functionality will be added with a firmware update. But it still is a discussion point, because it seems as though the PlayStation 5 is launching, for lack of a better word, hot. Mm-hmm. This is coming in very hot, and we knew both hardware were going to be launching in kind of a rushed state per se, because, we had the pandemic, which continues to cripple the world, and they pretty much expressed some concern that they wouldn't be able to launch in certain regions in 2020, and that they were open to the idea if one of the companies would delay till next year, that the other would follow suit, but neither did. And here we are, both systems launching in the same week, just days apart. And the PlayStation 5, we know now that the battery of the DualSense, a very innovative controller with the haptic triggers, may once again have a battery life issue. Based on some impressions, we've had it target as low as 2 hours, though this seems to be an outlier. And the majority of reports seem to suggest you'll get between 4 to 10 hours. This is comparable to the DualShock 4. Do you think the battery life of the DualSense is any cause of concern?
I don't think so, Nate, but I will say that I do wish maybe they could have come back with a better, longer lasting controller. I mean, they did take away some features of the DualShock 4, but obviously they added the rumble, the haptic triggers, and the new functionality in the controller that has, you know, the next gen features that make the controller so good. But I do wish, you know, there was more work being done to make the controller last longer. You know, I mean, it's very hard to compare to something like the Switch Pro controller, but I mean, you get literally, you know, 20, 30 hours out of a Pro controller on the Switch, and it doesn't even, you know, miss a beat, right? So I do wish there was more emphasis on retaining better battery life on you know, the new DualSense. But I also do understand that, you know, next gen comes with next gen features, and you know, the haptic functionality that does have a toll on battery life. If you want to experience it, then it's going to, you know, it's going to drain your controller more. So you do have obviously the option to disable that stuff and then get a longer lasting controller, you know, battery life. But I do wish there was you know, there was more life out of the new DualSense. It's one of those things that I've always had issues with my DualShock 4, where like I'm playing halfway through a game and then I have to charge it again, you know, and it doesn't seem like it's going to be a different experience with the DualSense on the PlayStation 5, which is unfortunate. But look, I also am not too concerned about it. I mean, it's just one of those things that you just kind of, it's part of PlayStation. When you think PlayStation, you think of a controller that you'll get between 4 to 8 hours out of before you have to recharge it. So, you know, it's not really a big deal to me that they haven't done it, but I do wish they had put a little more emphasis on it.
This is kind of one of the situations where I know Microsoft gets a lot of flack for not having a rechargeable battery in their controller by default, but this is a situation where I would like that option of being able to put in some AA batteries, because if the rechargeable battery has expired,
yeah,
and now it's, oh, I have to tether myself to charge it while I play, by having the option of just popping in those 2 AA batteries and resuming your game, that's just the option I prefer. And that's why I do like Microsoft having, you know, that choice. You can buy a rechargeable play kit, or you can just put in some AA batteries or rechargeable AA batteries where you can put, was it like 4 or 6 or 8 on a single charging kit?
Yeah.
And you can just swap in, swap out as you need. And I understand the convenience of why you want a, you know, just that recharge battery built into the controller. But sometimes options are, you know, for the better.
I don't know which way is better. Like I struggle with this because I'm not a massive fan of the AA batteries, but for a preservation perspective, it's the only thing that makes sense. You know, like a lot of people will know this, but some of the listeners may not, that trying to get a working PlayStation 3 controller today is almost impossible, because every single one has a dead battery in there, or there's just, you know, failure of the battery. Now, sure, you can open them up and replace those batteries, but I mean, the average person doesn't know how to do that. You know what I mean? And right now, the DualShock 4s, I mean, they're all still alive and well, but eventually they're going to suffer the same fate as the DualShock 3s, and the DualSenses are going to eventually, you know, suffer the same fate as the DualShock 3s as well. So I do wish they did go to the you know, traditional AA battery model, which I think is preferred. But hey, it's Sony. You know, it works for them. It has for a long time. It sold them millions and millions of systems, so you can't really fault them for that, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, aside from the battery life concerns, and it's going to vary individual to individual whether or not the battery life is sufficient in, you know, your own standards. The controller itself, all the impressions are very positive. It has some weight to it. It is fairly larger than the DualShock 4, and that's good for me. I have big hands, and everyone says the haptic triggers are really innovative, and a lot of people have compared it to HD Rumble, but it's something that's even further. It's an evolution of kind of what we saw Nintendo introduce, and one of the games that really will illustrate the benefits of the haptic triggers is Devil May Cry 5, where it's said that if you've played the game, you know all about the rev system.
Yeah.
So now when you rev up using the trigger, it's kind of like the first rev, you go down so far. The second one, you'll go down a little further. Then that third rev, you'll go down even further. So it kind of feels like you're switching gears.
Right.
And that's a really engaging way to increase the immersion of a game like Devil May Cry 5. And we've heard some of the examples of how they want to use it in games like Call of Duty, where if you're using a heavy weapon, when you pull that trigger, you're going to get resistance. Where if you're using a lighter gun like a pistol, it's a boom, it's a very quick trigger, not as much resistance. And these are immersive tools. Now, if there's something you just don't like play, you can disable them from a system level. And my only concern with this, and it's similar to what happened with HD Rumble, is how long are we actually going to see developers utilize this type of feature in the controller? First party wise, I expect Sony will use it for at least those first 12 to 18 months. And then it's going to look at data and say, well, most of the players have disabled it on a system level, or maybe reviews are coming out and impressions are saying, we really don't like this feature anymore. And then they'll basically view a game and say, well, maybe we don't need it, or we're going to make it an option. And third parties, you really can't depend on a third party to utilize such features outside of the first year. Because we saw HD Rumble was touted as this game-changing innovation for the Nintendo Switch. And I really can't name a dozen third-party examples that utilize this feature well. The only one I could say that used it really well was indie game Thumper, where you would feel the rumble on each side of the controller or the system based on the rail that you were grinding up against. And it felt really cool, but a lot of studios just defaulted back to basic rumble. And I fear that's what's going to happen with the DualSense with these haptic triggers and haptic feedback.
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about this. I mean, I've spoken to developers, and the message coming from Sony is, we'd love you guys if you could implement the haptic rumble stuff in your games early on, because it's something that they're trying to promote as a feature of the PlayStation, as a next-gen feature. But to your point, yeah, I mean, eventually it's one of those things that will just, I don't want to say get overlooked and not get used anymore, but you're right. Most third parties probably won't pick it up. And that's simply because there's no standardization between what Nintendo, Microsoft, and Sony have as far as a generic solution or a generic API that you can use across all three of them, right? So it takes more time to, to get it working on PlayStation. But I mean, as we know, writing games is hard. Shipping games is impossible. So there's not going to be, I think, that leeway given to get haptic rumble working on the PlayStation build. When there's such a very aggressive timeline to get your game out the door and shipped, type of thing. So yeah, I mean, will Kojima Productions do some unique stuff with the haptic rumble when whatever game he's working on next? Yes. I mean, I'm sure he'll come up with some really interesting and unique ways, and I think the feature is really cool. I love the fact that right now it's being touted as a really interesting next gen feature for Sony PlayStation 5. But yeah, Nate, to your point, I would expect it to start falling off as far as it's the amount of times it does get used, other than the first party games going forward.
Yeah, and it's always disappointing to see a feature be introduced with the introduction of a new generation, and it seems really cool and innovative at first, and then all of a sudden it is just forgotten for any number of reasons, as you've mentioned. So I guess it's really on Sony to continue to push the idea that this can be game changing. This could be game selling.
Yeah,
if you as a developer and the publisher are able to market it as a very ingenious and immersive way to experience the game that you can't get on any other platform. But that is a challenge, and sometimes it's easier to say, let's put in the basic rumble.
Right.
We don't need to exhaust too much effort into making some crazy new rumble or the way the triggers are going to resist to this feature or that feature. Let's just do the standard and ship the game out, and people will enjoy it.
Yeah.
Staying on the topic of software, as we've said in the previous discussion when we were talking about Microsoft's lack of software, Sony is coming out with a strong roadmap of what they have to come with the PS5 in those first 12 to 18 months. We have seen Demon Souls. It's available now on the PlayStation 5, and it is joined with Spider-Man Miles Morales and Sackboy's Big Adventure. And in 2021, we know that Gran Turismo is coming, Ratchet and Clank, and Horizons
Forbidden
2
West.
in the second half of 2021.
Forbidden West.
Yes, Forbidden West. And there's going to be a lot more Sony published or in Sony developed games coming out in 2021, also like God of War 2.
Yeah, and Returnal and some of these other games that they were showing off at their State of Play recently as well.
Yeah, you got Tokyo Ghostwire, you got some of those times exclusives. So the roadmap of software is very strong for Sony. And that's where this point kind of gets me a little concerned, but this could be alleviated in the near future. We simply don't have an answer to it yet. And it's that Sony has disabled the SSD expansion on the PlayStation 5 right now. And for launch day, I can see us giving them a pass on this because you're not going to fill out that 667 gigabytes on launch day, even if you buy Call of Duty and have to install 150 plus gigs, and then you decide to buy NBA and put another 150 gigs, you're still going to have space available. But why, as the company, would you want to disable your memory expansion solution right out of the box? Or is it simply because there are no SSD options that the consumer can even buy that you can use on the PlayStation 5 right now due to speed limitations?
Well, I think we can only speculate. And for me, I think there's two reasons for this. The first one is maybe they haven't really tested this and they've just disabled it for now. As far as, they've been testing drives with this and they've got some idea about how this is going to work, but they haven't whitelisted anything at the moment because they just simply haven't had enough time. I mean, you mentioned that the system is coming in hot. I mean, this is probably the hottest launch of any launch, like this system to me seems like it needed a little bit more time just to cook in the oven, ideally like February, March, kind of around spring break time, in the United States would have been what Sony was probably really wanting. They probably need a little bit more time, but hey, I mean, we're here. It's the holiday season now, and it's the console. The sales war starts today, right, with Microsoft and the PS5. So I think they've had to make some sacrifices to get this system out the door, and one of those is to disable the external SSD expansion. And I think it's simply because they know that, every kind of tech person is going to grab their M2 drives that they have laying around on their desk and start plugging them in and seeing what they can do with it. And I think they want to just reduce points of failure right now and, just come up with a solid solution for this. And, I think we'll definitely see this get re-enabled or get enabled, but it's probably going to be January, February timeframe before we actually get information and direction on what drives will work and what we can expect to see. But I think, like I said, Nate, I think it's simply, it's a potential point of failure that they don't want to have to deal with, especially now when, if you buy a PS5 and you're lucky enough to get a pre-order and you have a system and you're getting one today, I mean, if you have to send one back for repair, I mean, who knows when you're going to get one back? It could be quite a while. So I think they're just trying to mitigate the potential, failures that may occur.
I think I can give them a pass on the SSD expansion for the internal drive being disabled because, as you've said, you can't really get an SSD that you're going to be plugging into that. That's up to the standards that Sony has said that they want the speeds. But the external drive not being available to transfer PS5 games to.
That's a problem.
That is problematic. And we know you can't play PS5 software from an external hard drive.
Yeah.
It was simply a means. I guess you could say it's the freezer to your fridge.
Right.
I ran out of space. I need to put it in the freezer and then I can take it out and I'll thaw it when I want to play it. Right now, if I bought Call of Duty, NBA, Assassin's Creed, let's just say I bought every launch game because I have infinite funds and I have infinite amount of time.
Right.
So I buy every PS5 launch game. Well, I can only store maybe, let's go highball, we'll say 10.
Yeah.
I can store 10 PS5 games on that internal SSD. The rest, I just have to leave as uninstalled and then delete one of the 10 I have and then choose the game I want to play. So if I'm a big Call of Duty fan and I'm a big Madden fan and a big FIFA fan and all the games that are large in size, I now have to make the choice of saying, well, I'm going to delete my NBA 2K file so I can play Spider-Man.
Right.
Well, I played Spider-Man today and I want to play some NBA 2K. Now I have to delete Spider-Man and re-download 150 gigabytes to play NBA. And that is a very disappointing scenario to be in. Like, because we've seen the transfer speeds. The transfer, at least on the Xbox Series X, to transfer a game over only took a few minutes. I think in some cases it took like 10 to 15 minutes, which really isn't that long in the grand scheme of things. It's a lot better than downloading a 150 gigabyte file that could potentially take people hours, if not days. And I mean, I guess someone could counter that saying, well, if your internet speed is that slow, why did you get the game digitally?
Yeah.
But we also have to remember, and this problem isn't exclusive to the PS5, it's also a problem with the Xbox, is that even if you buy the game physically, once you put that disc in, it installs the entire game onto your SSD. So you're not saving yourself any space. Yes, the installation off disk is going to be quicker than digital download.
Right.
But it seems like an odd decision for Sony to say, no, you cannot put PS5 games on an external drive for storage at launch. And this, maybe they release a patch within a week. We don't know yet, but this is something they should have had day one, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think Microsoft definitely wins points for their solution right now, even though, you know, the only option you have for the external storage is the $219 1 terabyte Seagate drive. You still have different options as far as moving games around, you know, moving things off the internal storage onto external storage. There's, you know, they've definitely got a much better solution for this, and it seems like Sony's really, I mean, you're either on the internal and that's really about it, and, you know, pray that you don't fill up your drive, you know, and it is unfortunate, and I do think that Sony does need to, you know, do some work to get this under control. But hey, look, they've got the benefit of, you know, the holiday season where there's a few games coming out, and I think most people will enjoy those and not worry too much about, you know, what's coming. But I think they definitely have some work ahead of them, you know, going into January next year to get some of these updates out to really, you know, give people what they want with regards to the storage.
Yeah, it still feels like we're kind of running on a firmware that's not quite, I'll dub it 1.0.
Yeah, and it's funny because I would have expected to see a day one firmware get released today that would alleviate some of these issues. But again, it just seems like, you know, they're a little bit further behind where they need to be, you know, with this stuff.
Yeah, it's definitely curious because having review or hardware out there and not having all the features enabled, sometimes that's actually a planned move where the manufacturer doesn't want the reviewer to have access to everything yet.
Right.
But they always make a note in the embargo sheets that there will be a day one firmware update that will enable this feature, you know, et cetera. And that wasn't actually relayed this time. It's just some of these features are disabled and they will enable them in the future. But I would say buying a PlayStation 5 right now, if you have intentions of buying a lot of software, you know, Demon's Souls, Spider-Man, NBA, Madden, Call of Duty, etc., that you now actually have to say to yourself, am I going to run out of storage space?
Yeah.
Because you really don't want to have to rely on constantly having to delete and re-download or delete and reinstall.
Yeah,
it just becomes, you know, a convoluted mess.
I've been working with the Series S the last, you know, week and a half, and I'm literally looking at half the size of the drive as the PlayStation 5, and let me tell you, it's not fun juggling things around, you know, downloading something and then being told that you've run out of space and you have to free up space. It does get very, very frustrating very quickly. And look, I mean, most people, you know, will only play a couple of games at a time. And I think, it's not going to be a huge deal. But like you said, Nate, if you want to download your FIFA and your Madden, and then you want to download Call of Duty, and then maybe play some backward compatible games like Ghost of Tsushima or Last of Us Part 2, I mean, they're big downloads as well. All of a sudden, you're really going to be eating into that space very quickly, and then it's going to eventually get to a point where you have to make some decisions about what you want to do. So
since we brought up the idea of Ghost of Tsushima and The Last of Us Part 2, I'm going to talk about some of the backwards compatibility of the PlayStation 5 and kind of how it compares to the Xbox Series X, because we've seen demonstrations that showed the load times of PS5 versus the Series X using miscellaneous examples, be it Marvel's Avengers or The Witcher 3.
Yep.
And in most cases, the games are loading up incredibly fast. There's some discrepancies, a few seconds here or there. And even when they were comparing games that are only on PS5 and Series X, like Devil May Cry 5, the in-game load times, we're looking at like 5 seconds versus 4 seconds. They're all very fast, near instant in some cases. But when it came to the backwards compatibility, some rare cases are actually showing PS4 games, if you had an external SSD connected through USB, loaded faster on a PlayStation 4 or PlayStation 4 Pro than what they were loading on a PlayStation 5. And this left a lot of people confused, but it seems like it's likely a case of the PlayStation 5, because the backwards compatibility games are not optimized. It's just the PlayStation 5 is not opening the games due to the PS4 compression, that it's not running the game beyond what the compressed file is allowing it to.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely on the money, Nate. I mean, the first thing I want to say here is, look, the raw performance and power of the PlayStation 5 SSD will never change. It's very fast, right? So it all goes back to how it's utilized, how developers make use of the drive. Like, I saw John Linneman talk to the developers of Demon's Souls today, Bluepoint, and they were talking about how they basically were building the game, but they didn't have the SSD kind of enhanced patches in, and then eventually they added them in at some point during the game's development, and everything just started running extremely fast, and they were like, wow, this is next gen. So, they had that moment where they realized this is a game changer. And I think it's a very similar situation with backward compatibility. Just because you have a fast SSD doesn't out of the gate automatically mean that you're going to have fast loading. And in the case of backward compatibility, essentially what's going on is there is a lot of things that happen that when you translate a PlayStation 4 game to a PlayStation 5 game, it's not a one-to-one translation where it's like, well, it's running x86 over here, so we're running x86 on the PS5, so it should just work. There is a lot of things that happen. For example, like you said, Nate, there's decompression, there is shaders that have to get recompiled. There's a lot of translation that goes on to get a PS4 game running on a PS5. And I would say and I don't know this for a fact, but I would say that because Microsoft has spent a lot more time streamlining their backward compatibility process, and they've literally spent 15 years refining. And I'm not saying Sony hasn't, because I think their solution for PS4 on PS5 is a pretty good one, but they haven't focused as much attention on backward compatibility. I think that's a fair statement. Then they have some areas where they're going to fall behind, and this is definitely one of them. Now, is this a huge deal? No, I don't think so. It's definitely something that can be addressed if Sony chooses to do so. We know that they're not always the most receptive when it comes to going back in their to their catalog to get things working. Hopefully they will, but they also have their hands full again with the PS5, but hopefully this is something they do take a look at. But also we'll say that are the times that much of a concern? Like some of them are like 20% slower than the Series X, for example. I think Final Fantasy 15 was the one that I noticed that was, maybe 20 seconds slower. And I guess everyone just assumed it was going to be like, half the speed of the Xbox Series X for some reason. And I was a little bemused when people were a little confused as to why it wasn't. But yeah, I mean, you put the work in, you get the optimizations, you get the gains, and I think that's really what it comes down to with this. And hopefully they will put this on the roadmap of things they need to address, in 2021, and we'll definitely get to see that. But it's very hard to say right now because I mean, let me ask you this: like, if you're Sony, if you're the VP of of delivery, and you're road mapping, what you need to do for next year, Nate, where do you put this on the list? Right? It's probably not on top. It's probably, I don't know, 3/4 down the list, maybe. I mean, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it'd definitely be at the bottom because I want to prioritize the new software that I'm developing. I don't want to prioritize backwards compatibility, especially at a large scale. I might prioritize our own titles. Like we've seen The Last of Us Part 1 remastered get a patch on PlayStation 4 that also reduced the load times by, I believe, to a factor of, like, it was significant.
Yeah.
I think it cut it down in half, if not more.
Right.
And that was clear preparation for the PlayStation 5. So yeah, I'm going to look at games like Last of Us Part 2 or Bloodborne. I'm saying, how much better can we improve these? And I'm going to optimize those games. The rest of the things, third-party games, if you go down from, let's use, as an example, if it took a game 2 minutes to fully load on the PlayStation 4, and with no optimization, it's 35 seconds on the PS5, I'm going to say it's good enough. We cut it down by, a factor of 65 to 70%. I think people will be pleased with that result.
Yeah.
If there is that rare case where somehow it is taking longer than the PlayStation 4 did, I think I just wash my hands of it unless it is a prestigious game. Otherwise, it's just, you're not going to hook up your PlayStation 4 to play that game. You're not.
Yeah.
So, deal with it type of scenario, which, that's kind of a reminder. Companies aren't our friends. They're about making money, they're a business, and they're going to look at it case by case and say, is it really worth addressing? Probably not, in the vast majority of them. And, like you brought up, Microsoft has spent hours and hours, months and years to make their backwards compatibility solution as top-notch as it is. Sony has invested a fraction of that. So you have to applaud Microsoft for their dedication. Sony and backwards compatibility, it's not a focus of theirs. It is not a focus of Jim Ryan's. We should probably be grateful that it is as strong as it is on PlayStation 5, because there was concerns, you and I expressed them, of what exactly are we getting from Sony and backwards compatibility on PlayStation 5? Is it just going to be the equivalent of a PlayStation 4 Pro? We're going to put in the game and we're just going to get those type of benefits, or is it going to go above and beyond? And they did go above and beyond in numerous ways.
Yep.
May not be to the same heights that we're seeing from Microsoft, but it's still a very viable and impressive solution where I can play all my PlayStation 4 games on the PS5 and say, hey, I'm generally speaking getting a better experience. And I never upgraded to a PlayStation 4 Pro, so it'll be nice to see some of those increased, visuals and performance in select games, be it a Last of Us Part 2 or Ghost of Tsushima. So it is, it's promising. And Sony still has the edge with the SSD over Microsoft. I believe it was Devil May Cry 5, where they did the initial boot on Polygon, and the PS5 booted up, I think it was around 19 seconds, and it took the Xbox Series X, I believe it was about 40 seconds. Mm-hmm. But part of that 40 seconds, it was that the Xbox was doing the background internet check.
Right.
And PS5 just seemed like it went through it quicker.
Yep.
And, maybe that time will change. It wasn't Polygon, it was Kotaku. That's my mistake. And, those might be some of the difference we see in very select cases. But the in-game loads of like 4 seconds on PS5 to 5 seconds on the Xbox Series X, that's probably going to be the norm we're seeing. And hopefully it doesn't become a fanboy war of my system is 1.5 seconds faster than yours. At those types of difference, it's minuscule. It's a blink of an eye. No one's going to notice it unless you put it side by side or in written context to say 3 is faster than 5.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, both have really good SSD. The backwards compatibility solution, Microsoft does have the edge. Sony can continue to firmware update the hardware, optimize some of the software if they want to improve their experience. It's up to them. We really don't know what Jim Ryan's vision is for backwards compatibility.
I'd like to think they'd take a look at the analytics, over the next 6 to 12 months, because there will be people that are playing a lot of PS4 games on their PS5, right? There'll be people that are playing Ghosts and Last of Us and games like that on their PS5 and in backward compatibility mode. Whether they take that data, that those analytics, and maybe, I don't want to say change their mind, but take a look at it and say, maybe we need to focus on this a little bit more, especially in the first 2 years, because we've got games coming, but the amount of games are still going to be spread out a little further along than what we want them to be. So maybe we should boost our backward compatibility and focus on that some more. But again, I don't know if it's high priority for them. I think it's probably in the medium-low category for them, but I would like to see them definitely improve, some of the things. But I mean, what I've seen so far, Nate, I don't have the system. Hopefully I'll get one in the next couple of days, and I'll definitely be focusing on backward compatibility testing myself. It seems promising. It looks good. It's a very good solution, and honestly, it surprised me because I didn't think that they were this far along with backward compatibility. I thought maybe it would be something that would work, but maybe just be more one-to-one, like you said, with the PS4 Pro, and not really offer anything significant. So I am very happy to see what they've done, and they've definitely got a good launching pad here to make improvements if they choose to do so.
Now, there is an area where if I'm Sony, I'm prioritizing this. And it's in a number of areas, but right now we've had reports from reviewers that their systems have actually broke.
Yep.
And as we alluded to earlier, I mean, it's not uncommon for hardware to fail, especially in that initial wave. But some review outlets, PlayStation 5s have broke. And Jeff Gerstmann of Giant Bomb has also encountered an issue where whenever he put his PlayStation 5 into rest mode while playing Spider-Man Remastered, it would crash the system and it would force it into the repair your external drive process whenever he started it back up. And this was an ongoing issue. We would have to, there doesn't seem to be a simple solution. It seems unknown. And right now, Insomniac is investigating it and whether or not it's an issue with Spider-Man Remaster. But could this actually just be is this a hardware issue or is this a software issue? Because right now it could actually be either one, but I think the concerning thing is some of the review units that have broke encountered a very similar problem, and it makes me wonder, is it the SSD bridge?
Yeah.
Is it breaking?
Well, the other person that I'm aware of is Carrick from ACG. He had a similar issue where it rendered his PS5 unusable, and now Sony's shipping him out a new one while they investigate what's going on. I think, Nate, this is probably something that can be fixed in a firmware patch. So I wouldn't be too concerned that it's a hardware flaw. If it was a hardware flaw, then wow, that would be pretty devastating if that was the case. I suspect what's happening here is that when there's when one of those repair your drive processes or rebuild your database processes come up, it's usually when something has shut down, abnormally, right? Or if, sometimes like your PlayStation will turn itself off halfway through, or maybe you get like a power surge or something that shuts down your PS4 or it overheats or something, and then you turn it back on and you get that rebuilding your database. It's a similar thing here, I would suspect, in that the SSD is probably working overtime. It's doing all sorts of, read and write activity to the SSD as the game is running. And for some reason, it's forcing that repair process to kick in. I don't think it's a hardware thing. And I don't want, to alarm anyone, certainly that it is. I do think, though, it's definitely something we'll have to keep an eye on, as the launch of the PS5 comes out, especially today when we know more people start getting their hands on the system. Will we hear more, reports of this, or is this truly an isolated thing? Hopefully it is an isolated thing. Maybe it's, just, isolated to review units, I guess, but we'll definitely have to keep a close eye on this one because, look, the problem, if there is a problem with the PlayStation 5 and the SSD, it's that if that SSD controller fails, then you've got a paperweight. You know what I mean? Like there's no recovery. Like even the Xbox Series X, I mean, you've seen the internals. I've done a teardown on it. Spawnwave did a teardown. The M2 drives can be replaced. Now, I'm not saying you can just swap them in yourself, but you could send them back to Microsoft Service Center and they could just, replace the drive for you, or they could even ship out a drive for you and you could do it yourself. I'm not suggesting that's what they would do, but there is a path there to potentially replace your drive, right? On the PlayStation 5, if that controller dies, then you have no recourse, right? There's nothing you can do, and unless there's a way to enable the external drive that's in the system, which currently is not even working. But you know what I'm saying? Like, so I think it's paramount, and I'm sure Sony has done hundreds of thousands of hours of testing on this, on the SSD. That's an exaggeration. They've done a lot of testing. They have to make sure that SSD controller is bulletproof, and that does make me believe that this is more of a firmware problem, Nate. But again, we'll have to see how this one plays out, because this one, I'm not saying, I'm not panicking. I don't think this is a concern, but it's definitely one to keep an eye on for sure. I want to hopefully not hear more stories about this going forward.
Yeah, because it seems like based on how these two systems are made, the Xbox and the PlayStation 5, that the main point of failure would likely be the SSD, because everything else seems to be high-end, well put together. And as you brought up, the SSD, if it does fail, does present a very challenging problem, because the OS should be on the SSD.
Yep.
So it's not as simple as, as you said, you can't just take out the SSD of your Series X or your Series S and say, I want a 2 terabyte one, and put it on. If it doesn't have the OS on it, it's not going to do anything. The system is just a big paperweight. And if the PlayStation 5 is set up the same way, it has the OS on the SSD, you can't just swap out and put in a new one to replace it and say, oh, all the problems are fixed. You have to send it back to Sony for, a full-on replacement. And it doesn't appear that we're on the verge of a new red ring of death.
Right.
Or blue ring of death, whatever Sony has it on their system. So it doesn't seem like we're at that point. It's just, you kind of look at the system kind of like, hopefully we don't see this become a widespread issue. It's
never a good look when reviewers have defective systems. I mean, I think that's really the big takeaway here is, I mean, we hear about it from the general public, that they have potentially issues, but you've got two different reviewers out there and they have the same problem, and that's not a good look. That whole thing, perception is reality, is really something that is apparent here. And again, hopefully this is not something that we hear about after today, hopefully.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing is you see this news and it's kind of like, okay, that makes me a little concerned, but as long as it doesn't become widespread after launch, we're probably in the clear. But obviously, as we said, every system has a certain percentage of failure, especially out of that first few months. Something's bound to fail. These systems are mass produced. It could be just not enough thermal paste. It can be a screw is slightly off. Something will fail. We just have to we just hope it's not a widespread issue. And I'm sure Sony is looking into it. I'm sure Insomniac is looking into it and saying, okay, this is a firmware issue. This is a software issue. We can now look into it. We can do our bug testing. We can find the problem. We can solve it before it becomes a rampant issue. Because even if it is a firmware or software issue, if a lot of people start to encounter it, you do kind of get a sense of fear. if you're a potential consumer saying, oh no, I haven't picked up my PS5 yet, and I'm hearing everyone playing this game, that their PS5 continues to go into a reboot mode and you get a black screen and you have to go through these steps to, rebuild the database. And you might say, I can wait a few months now. You work out the bugs.
Right.
And it's just a narrative you don't want as a company.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So hopefully it's not that big of a deal. Now, there are a couple of areas that Sony may address, but they may not. And it's that the PlayStation 5 does not support 1440p and it doesn't have VRR support. Now, can you explain to the listener why having VRR is important?
Well, I mean, I think the best way to talk about VRR, which is variable refresh rate, is it's one of those things where it gives you that kind of silky smooth look, even though the frame rates are all kind of jumping around. And I think the best example I've seen would be if you go and watch the Devil May Cry video that Digital Foundry just brought out a few days ago. They kind of illustrate why VRR is important, because you've got that high res or that high refresh rate 120 hertz mode, which never quite gets there, right? And it just looks like a real jumpy mess of a game, even though it's running at like 108, 109 frames per second. In theory, you should be getting a really smooth experience at that frame rate, but because there's no variable refresh rate functionality to kind of smoothen out that experience for you, then it just doesn't look very good. And Microsoft does have the edge right now with VRR on their system. So it's definitely something that Sony will want to, put into a future revision of their firmware, especially, when we're starting to see that even though it's a system that targets 4K 60 or even higher refresh rates at 120 hertz, I mean, we're already starting to see that some games, even though they're targeting that frame rate, are not going to lock at 4K 60, right? So having that option available to you really does make things a lot better. You want that smooth, looking screen, you want that low latency, and you just want a good experience on a big television. And if you don't, then you're going to get torn frames, you're going to get a juddery experience. And ultimately, it's something Sony really needs to consider adding in, onto their firmware in the near future, I would say.
Now, of the two, would you say VRR is more important than 1440p support, or are they equally important? Because if you don't have 1440p support, with some of these games that have dynamic resolution, you could actually be playing a PS4 game that is trying to target 4K, and it could drop all the way to 1080p. And when you're playing that on your 4K TV, it's not going to look as sharp as you're hoping. But if you had the 1440p option, at least you kind of have that middle ground.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah, I mean, both features are pretty important. But if I had to say, again, if I was the product manager at the VP of product delivery at Microsoft and I had to make a choice, I'd probably go with VRR as the more important one. 1440p is definitely important, and I think it's something that they want to add. But I think the 1440p omission is just a leftover from the PlayStation 4 days, because I mean, if you take a look at some of the settings options in the PS5 UI, it looks very PS4 to me. It looks very PS4 Pro. Like I don't want to say they just they took that firmware and they didn't add anything to it, but I think they use that as the baseline of the PlayStation 5's firmware. And again, it's one of those things where you're running low on time. You have to bake in as much as you can before the launch of the system to make consumers happy. Then something has to get eliminated, I guess, or miss out. And I think 1440p unfortunately was one of them. But I do think 1440p, especially when games will run at 1440p checkerboard, or there'll be a native 1440p mode that up-reses to 4K with reconstruction, stuff like that. It's going to be important to have that 1440p mode, because if you don't have a 1440p capable display, or if you don't have a 4K display, then it's going to just drop back to 1080p. And, or on the flip side, you may have a 4K display, but because your PlayStation 5 doesn't have a 1440p mode, then it may drop you back to 1080p if you don't have HDMI 2.1. So there's all sorts of weird permutations, with 1440p not being a part of the PS5's firmware at this time. But yeah, again, I think they'll add it, but whether it's higher priority than we think, I'm not sure. But I'd like to think it's definitely something they think about adding over the holidays. But yeah, I mean, I would say, variable refresh rate is probably something that has more priority over the 1440p mode.
Now, one final area that seems like maybe this comes in a firmware update is that the PlayStation 5 does not have Quick Resume, which is one of the Xbox Series X and Series S's premier features. And it's kind of a feature that people had just assumed would be on the PlayStation 5. And I guess Sony let the fans fight this war for them because Sony never really addressed it. We really didn't get a clear answer until review units went out and people said there is no, Quick Resume. There is a suspend play, which is similar to what we saw on the PlayStation 4, where you can play the game, you can suspend it, you put your system into standby mode, you can come back 2 days later, you pick it up and you play, right where you were. But with the SSD, it is really not that much of a benefit to have just the suspend play, because we've seen Spider-Man loads up in just a few seconds, and games like Astro's Playroom, you have the activity cards where you can just jump right into a level in just, I think it was like 2 to 3 seconds. So it almost seems like Sony is using the activity cards as a replacement of sorts to Quick Resume, but in reality, activity cards are basically glorified hyperlinks. They're hyperlinks to certain areas of the game. So if you're playing Devil May Cry 5 and you want to go to Bloody Palace, you just go to the activity card for Bloody Palace and it's going to load you up right into that. So on its own, I think activity cards are a very engaging and very kind of exciting new feature to see on the PlayStation 5. But I wouldn't say it replaces Quick Resume, because the benefit of Quick Resume is that I can be playing Tetris Effect connected. I can go into the journey mode, and you could shoot me a DM on Discord or Twitter and say, Nate, let's play a quick multiplayer match of Gears of War 5. And I say, man, I'm right in the middle of a zone on Tetris Effect, and I want to clear 20 of them really quick. So Quick Resume, suspend it, go into Gears 5, play with you, go right back into my Tetris game. It's going to be, right where I left off, and I can even leave Gears 5 running in the background. And Sony doesn't have their own solution. They don't have their own option of this. And it does sound like it's something they are working on. It will come in the distant future. But do you think the omission of it is glaring, or do you think it's kind of just is it a buzz feature from Microsoft? Is it something Sony actually needs?
That's a good question. It's hard to answer right now because, I mean, I've experienced Quick Resume on the Series S and I love the feature. But to be very clear, I mean, I was using it when I was reviewing the Xbox Series S. So I was jumping around between games, and I was getting a great experience from doing that. But that's not my normal workflow. You know what I'm saying? Like, my normal workflow is I'm playing a game and I'm turning off my Xbox at the end of the night, and then the next day I resume, and it's nice to jump back into that game, which is what Sony offers, right? So, I mean, what they have is what I'm looking for is what they have out of the box. So I'm good there. However, your scenario about, hey, let's play a multiplayer Gears, I mean, that is a very compelling scenario to me where I can just hop out of a game, jump in and do something else. And one of the things that I really like, and I've been doing this with the Series S, is I'm playing Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and then I'm logging into Game Pass because I see something on the EA store that I want to grab, for example, Dead Space 2. So I download that, and when that's ready, I'm still playing Valhalla. Then I jump into Dead Space 2 and start playing that and getting, loving that for a couple of hours, and then jumping back to Valhalla. So I am finding that I'm starting to get on board with quick resume, and I do think is it a glaring omission that Sony has to incorporate? I don't know if they need to do that, but it's definitely something that I would miss, if I don't have that feature. So I do wonder if it's something that they think is important enough to add, at least maybe between 2 games, because I know on the Xbox, I think you can have up to 4 games at the same time. So something similar would definitely be something that I would like to see Sony do on the PS5.
Yeah, it seems like the real benefit of quick resume, because I know a lot of people will say, I don't need it. The SSDs are so fast, I can get right into the games, in lightning speed anyways. But it's really kind of how your example was, is that you're playing Valhalla and you could just be in the middle of walking around. You're not near, an area to save, and you suspend the game. You jumped into your dead space. You jump into any other game, and you just go right back to Valhalla, and it's right where you left off. And that's the benefit of quick resume.
Yeah.
And like before, when I was thinking about it, I'm like, I'm probably not going to use it that much. But then the more I thought about it, I was like, there will be times where I'm playing a game where I'm not going to be in an area where I can save, or maybe the game doesn't have a save anytime feature. And that's going to be where I really use it. Now, out of like the launch games, there's really not that many options of, where I'm going to be like, oh man, I'm in this epic, crazy boss battle that's taking forever and I can't save. So I'm going to quick resume it so I can go play something else in the meantime. But eventually we could hit that point. And maybe that's when Sony kind of says, okay, let's do it ourselves. We want to have at least, 2 to 3 game functionality. And obviously that's something that Sony would have to investigate the OS and say, do we have the space and the RAM and, everything prioritized to make this reality? It's not as simple as just snapping their finger and saying, boom, new feature. They have to look at the resources available to them. And it's kind of like the Nintendo Switch.
Yeah.
Everyone says, why isn't the Switch's OS more dynamic? It's because Nintendo's made that OS to operate on 500 megabytes of RAM. It's very sterile and non-obtrusive by design. You can't just add these brand new features because they had not allocated RAM to run that OS. So there's a lot of work that goes on in the background to get these type of features up and running, and that's where it just feels like Microsoft is ahead of the game compared to Sony when it came to the hardware and features and firmware. Microsoft had their priority. They knew what features they wanted at launch. They knew they wanted to have expandable storage. They knew they wanted to have the SSD option for $220. They knew they wanted to have quick resume. They knew they wanted to have all these features up and ready. And Sony kind of said, we have suspend play. Our OS works. It's snappy. It's fast. And we have the activity cards. Everything else can come at a later date. Is it a big deal in the grand scheme of things? It depends on you as the consumer. If you want more from the operating system and you want more features, Microsoft may be in the lead to you. If you just want a snappy OS and just to go right into your games, then Nintendo or the PlayStation 5, from Sony might be what you prefer. And, that's the interesting thing with these companies is each one has their own priority and their own focus of how they wanted to deliver their system. And Microsoft was really a more dynamic way of play, where Sony went kind of that more simplistic route, at least out of the box, of you can get into your game fast.
Yeah.
It works. I mean, as a gamer, I like that.
Which way is better?
Ooh. I mean, it's tough because I look at the Switch and I love how there's no ads. There's nothing crazy. It's just tiles, hit the thing, game boots up, and I'm in my game. Sony kind of feels like they went with that similar path, but at the same time, this is, it's the PlayStation 5. When you look at the PS4 and you had all these features and stuff, Sony wants to have these features. It's just a case of we kind of got the system out very quick and we don't have time to implement them yet. And Microsoft wants to be that one box in your living room.
Right.
Where you could suspend Valhalla because you want to watch a movie with your kids. Or you boot up Netflix. Or you want to, use Hulu. You want to use those multimedia services. And then your kid comes out, I want to play Tetris with you. Okay, grab the second controller and you boot up Tetris while Valhalla is still suspended. And it's like, it's very intuitive and welcoming just that breadth of options. And I think that's where Microsoft might have the edge, is that they are giving the player and the user so many options, but does it come at a cost? Is that something that maybe you wanted to save, a few gigabytes of that, SSD that's going towards quick resume and have that accessible to your game storage? If you weigh the pros and the cons, maybe it still strikes a balance.
Yeah, I mean, like the Xbox Series S and X dashboard, let's be honest, it's almost identical to the One X, right?
Yes.
So I wonder if, they had more time to focus on some of those new enhancements because they had that baseline of the current dashboard and the current firmware. Sony, they didn't rewrite a new, user interface, user experience from scratch, but I think they did obviously a lot more work on the user experience, the UI side, because they've definitely changed it since the PS4 days. So yeah, I think really that's what they felt was more important, to give the user a better experience just to play games, So I don't fault them for that, but I do think there's definitely some work they need to do, because when you got the PlayStation 4 Pro and the PS4 and you have features on those that have been taken away on the PS5, that's when people ask questions like, well, this was working on the PS4 Pro, why can't I have it on the why can't I move my games onto external storage? Why can't I do stuff like that? So I think that's the things that Sony really need to address. Otherwise, they come out and say we're not planning on doing that, which is not something they'll do. So, but yeah, I think it's just, man, it's obviously it's been they've been going at 100 miles an hour with this launch. I made a video a few weeks ago, or actually it was 6 weeks ago now, saying that I was a little unsure about where the PS5 was, right? And look, I do admit that maybe it was a bit of I don't want to say clickbait, but it was one of those videos where I was just, stirring the pot a little bit, asking questions. And here we are. I got to commend Sony for bringing out the PS5 today. I think the launch is I think they'll be very, very relieved that this system has finally come out and people are starting to play their systems today. But let's be under no misconceptions here. They have a lot of work to do to get that OS and that firmware to parity to what people expect.
Yeah, I kind of commended them on the idea that they made a streamlined OS that prioritized getting you into your game right away, and there's no obstruction from the movies. That's a separate tab. So when you go to that main screen, you're not going to see all these, Netflix, Hulu, all that stuff on the screen. It's, here's your games. This is what you can play. And it does remind me of the Switch in many ways, because you have the tiles and then it goes to a bigger tile screen after. So it does seem like they almost looked at Nintendo and the Switch and said, you guys really made it a streamlined, type of organized main screen where you knew exactly what you wanted the players to see. We're going to use that, but we're going to make it a little better. We're going to actually give you options to the games, like the activity card. And I think it's going to work well for them. And when you have really good software, you will overlook some of the missing features, like not having the SSD expandable option or not having external hard drive support for PS5 games. You're going to kind of forget those aren't there because you're playing these new exciting games. You're playing Miles Morales or you're playing Demon's Souls. And that's where Sony might be in a stronger position than Microsoft, is that they do have those first-party exclusives that are, flashing all those brand new features, like the haptic triggers with the Astro Playroom demo and, ray tracing in Spider-Man and everything. So they're basically distracting you from the hardware shortcomings with fantastic software. Whereas Microsoft has that fantastic hardware and fantastic OS features. They just don't have that big next-gen first-party game yet. And you can't distract people with a flashy OS and say, look how awesome we are, and distract you by not having games. The games are always the focus, and that's where Sony seem to put their priorities. And it may work out for them, at least in the short term. but we know Sony's roadmap in 2021 is a lot of quality software, and they are going to enhance their operating system with new features over time. So they're going to build up to something great. Hopefully, it just keeps that OS running fast. I don't want to see it become a convoluted mess where it slows down.
Yeah.
And I think they'll avoid that. And we can move into some of the Streamlab questions for the week. We had a $3 donation from Wolverail12, who writes, "Hey MVG, I was thinking of getting an internal HDMI mod for my PlayStation 2 Slim. Do you know of any places or people that could mod it for me to get HDMI, or do you think I should just buy an external HD converter, and if so, which one?"
So there are internal HDMI mods that are currently being developed, but as far as I know, none of them are currently out as far as in retail. There are different solutions you can try. I know this question's been asked before when we had John Lindemann on the show. Someone asked a very similar question, but you could, if you wanted to do something now, I would recommend getting a component cable for your PS2 and then basically just going through something like an OSSC upscaler into a display. I think you would get a pretty good image. That's what I have here, and I use that myself. And I will tell you that games like Gran Turismo 4 running at 1080i look absolutely amazing. So I would say go down that path. But if you want to wait for a true HDMI solution, then you'll have to wait a little longer when some of the internal mods start to become available. We
then had a $100 donation from the Zelda Sensei, to whom this episode is dedicated to, and they write, "Age of Calamity sounds like it has a struggling frame rate issue. This has turned some people off from playing the game. What is an issue you guys can't stand that would make you not want to play a game?" Ooh.
I think frame rate is one for me. Depending on how bad it is, it does play a part in my enjoyment of a game. Look, I mean, I would like a lock 30 or a lock 60 on every single game that's out there. Sometimes it's not an option, but if a game starts to dip into the teens and it's literally, I don't want to say ruining, but it's hindering my experience, then I'm not going to have enjoyment from that game.
Yeah, I mean, frame rate is usually a pretty big one. I'd probably have to go with input lag. I can't stand a game where I hit like the A button, take my thumb off the button, and then I see my character jump. Because if it's that much of a delay, it basically makes my, response timing impossible. I can't match the movements, and it's, virtually unplayable. Or another issue for me, and just an issue for me and other people, is that when games don't have a colorblind option, games like Puyo Puyo Tetris, when they launched on the Switch back in 2017, was actually unplayable for me because I could not tell the difference between some of the colored blocks. And trying to play a Puyo Puyo game and not being able to match colors is a recipe for disaster. So I tried the game numerous times. I couldn't play the game. I put it down, and they eventually did add a colorblind mode. And that is a feature that more developers have to incorporate into their games, be it multiplayer games like Call of Duty, when it comes to the radar.
Yep.
Because, as you know, it's a red blinking light, and I don't see why there aren't options in all those type of games to have blue or any number of colors. We have a lot of colors in the world. You don't have to rely on red and green in all of them. So that'd be something just for, my personal struggle of color blindness, to see colorblind options. Then had a $1 donation from Jackie G, who writes, "No question this time, just love for the content and look forward to another year of watching." Thank you, Jack. And we look forward to another year of you listening. And that does it for all the Streamlabs questions this week. If you'd like to support the channel, we have a Streamlabs link in our description on YouTube in the description section below. You can donate any amount you want, ask a question. We will answer it at the end of the episode. Donate $100 or more, and we will dedicate the episode to you. This episode was once again dedicated to the Zelda Sensei. Thank you for your generosity and donation once again. And
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to thank MVG for joining me as always.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Nate. It was fun. Enjoyed this one.
You can find MVG's YouTube channel linked in the description below, as well as links to his Xbox Series S review and Xbox Series S teardown. And if you enjoyed this video, give the video a like. If you didn't, give it a dislike. Be sure to subscribe to the channel. And as always, continue to embrace the hate.